Captain, Captain, I said you must be cross. When it's 12 o'clock and you wanna go. Oh, snag it, snag it. Oh, mess around, mess around.
All right, everybody. So after this musical interlude by a newly public domain artwork, piece of music, I would like to bid you all welcome to this this year's Public Domain Day, this Belgium's Public Domain Day. Before we get started, I would like to cover some housekeeping. So this session will be recorded. So please turn off your camera and microphone for the duration of this this webinar, and place your questions in the chat, and my colleagues will try to answer them there. Feel free to post on social media using the hashtags in the top right corner to make this event a bit more visible and continue the conversation there. So on the program today, we have a presentation by Camille Françoise from Creative Commons on good practices using Creative Commons tools and the focus where they want to place education for GLAM.
Sam, can I just interrupt you because I think you're not aware that your slides are not shown at this point.
Are they not? Okay.
They are not.
All right.
Talking about the hashtags, it would be nice to see them.
Yeah. All right. So. All right.
Perfect.
All right, perfect. So, and then after Creative Commons, we'll move on to a Open GLAM showcase. So the idea there is to give people who have done specific things to make public domain collections available or to determine whether collections are public domain a platform. I will say something about opening up the Fine Arts Museums of Ghent collections. And then Piet Janssen and Sebastian Hermans will say something about their work at the Royal Library of Belgium. And then my colleagues at Memo, Ellen van Keer and Bart Magnus, will tell you something about how we are reviewing our rights labeling on our websites. And also Bart Magnus will say something about the public domain tool, which we launched last year during Public Domain Day. And then after that, we'll move on to a panel discussion about how to actively facilitate creative reuse. Just moving on a bit more from the principal question to how, why do you specifically do it from a strategic point of view, with Dieter Sulz from the Fashion Museum of Antwerp, Dietert Vlaming from Koers, Olivier van Duinslager from the Design Museum of Ghent, and Sophie Teugels from Collections of Ghent project. And then we will end this Public Domain Day, as always, with the Wiki Loves Heritage Photography Contest prize ceremony, and something that may be of interest to many heritage institutions. Wikimedia Belgium's plans to launch a Wikimedia in Residence project. So let's start first with the basics. So the public domain is the collection of all the creative works to which no exclusive intellectual property rights apply. Those rights may have expired, they may have been forfeited, and they may have been expressly waived or just be inapplicable. Just a note on logos. So the public domain mark is not a license per se. It is a tool to communicate the right status to your audience, but it's not a license. And also CC0, it's a waiver, it's not a license. And what's also important is, like, even though a collection may be public domain, neighboring rights may apply, and privacy rights may apply, or other things. And the Open GLAM community promotes showing this information clearly and correctly through right statements, and move away from limiting access or reuse by claiming additional copyright on a reproduction. So it's a pretty complex issue just by the fact that copyright legislation is not uniform throughout the whole world. As you can see from this map, there are countries who provide 50 years of protections. There are some that provide 70, like Belgium, and there are some who provide 100 years of protection. So in countries with 70 years of copyright protection, the work of, for instance, these three people enter the public domain. So we have Ludwig Wittgenstein, the famous Austrian-British philosopher, is very well known for his work in logic, philosophy, and mathematics, and the philosophy of the mind. Then we also have Oscar Devereux-Michaud, an author, film director, and producer of more than 44 films. And then in the middle, you have Arnold Schoenberg, Austrian and American composer, musical theorist, teacher, writer, and painter. So they all died in 1951, which means after 70 years, their work is no longer protected by copyright. Now, just to demonstrate that things are a bit more complex, and the example of the United States applies here. So in the US, the lack of uniformity is not only caused by a difference of protection periods, but also that copyright in some cases is determined from date of publication rather than the death of the author. So from January 1st, 2021, copyrighted works from 1926 will enter the US public domain. And you have such works such as A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh, Felix Salten's Bambi. You also have Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Always Rises, Langston Hughes' The Weary Blues, and so on. Also some silent films featuring Buster Keaton and Greta Garbo, and some well-known jazz standards, as as you were all able to listen to in the beginning of this session. So why do public domain day? Why meet each other every year to sort of discuss this issue? Well, copyright law gives authors an important right that encourages creativity and distribution, so they can make a living from their art. And in case of the early death of the author, their family are also guaranteed an income. That's the basic idea. But it also ensures that those rights last a limited amount of time, so that when the rights expire, these works can enter the public domain and future authors can legally build upon their work. And therefore, what's often said is that the public domain is the rule and copyright protection is the exception. If you look at the transmission of ideas throughout the centuries. However, the fact that works are legally available does not mean that they are actually available. And that's why a public domain day also provides a platform to sort of show we made this small part of our collection available, or this big part, so we can just share our progress. And then here, for instance, is an example of what can work. So Ten Overlord is a series of plays by Tom Lanois. that were inspired by the work of Shakespeare. And then why do Public Domain Day for the heritage sector? Well, we would like to sort of promote that opening up your public domain collections is the easiest place to start opening up your collections. We also want to advocate against bad practices, for instance, claiming rights on public domain material. And yeah, so this is also a platform for that. I have not been involved with Public Domain Day in Belgium since the beginning, but as far as I know, the first edition was in 2016. So that means that we now have like 7 consecutive years of celebrating the public domain and having access to the public domain. Now, it could be interesting for people in the heritage sector to sort of follow what other people are doing, not just in Belgium, but you know, in other places around the world. And for this, social media might be a good opportunity to see what other heritage practitioners are doing. For instance, the OpenGLAM Twitter account is a great place to keep abreast of what is going on elsewhere and to get inspired for your own work. The Public Domain Review is a website that aggregates and curates a lot of public domain material in a very nice way. That's also a very nice initiative. And there's also initiatives that are stimulating creative reuse. I'll just show a couple. So here you have a hack for OpenGLAM, which is a 5-day culture hack for getting creative with open access to cultural heritage. The last one was during the Creative Commons Global Summit in September 2021. And the event brings together GLAM professionals, advocates of open cultural heritage, digital creators, and developers to sort of learn, work, and create together and find solutions for a specific problem. And as an institution, you could pitch your collection to be reused, for instance. Another fun initiative, you may have noticed the GIF at the beginning of today's webinar. Well, these GIFs are created in the context of Europeana's annual GIF making contest, which they organize each fall. It's like a very light and fun way to stimulate creative reuse. Now, so what does OpenGLAM look like around the world? Well, fortunately, Douglas McCarthy from Europeana and researcher Andrea Wallace, they have been working on an ongoing OpenGLAM survey, and the last version recorded more than 1,200 instances of OpenGLAM practice, which you see mapped on this map because they have been encoded in Wikidata and can be mapped on this on the world map according to a Sparkle query. Now, in the survey, they managed to get some information about which kind of institutions are already developing an open access practice. The chart on the left shows that. And what is also interesting is that the survey shows that OpenGLAM practices kind of vary widely. I think the graph on the left shows that while some institutions are opening up all their data, the majority are still opening up a portion of their data. So there's a number of platforms where you can offer public domain collections to reusers. So besides the institutional websites, there's of course aggregators such as Europeana, but there's also third-party platforms such as Wikimedia. There's Flickr Comments, and there's specialized platforms for 3D materials such as Sketchfab, for instance. Essentially, the survey is just a big spreadsheet. So if you are an institution that you feel should be on there, please contact Andrea Wallace and Douglas McCarthy. So after this brief introduction, I would like to move on to Camille Françoise from Creative Commons, who will tell us something about Creative Commons priorities in educating the heritage sector about best practices using their tooling. Camille, is it okay if you just share your camera, and then I will move the slides for you?
Yes, it sounds great.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Well, it's just me. I need to settle. Okay, I think that would work. So, well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm absolutely delighted to join this event to celebrate the public domain together, and also to hear all the other speakers that we come after. So I am Camille Françoise, and I work for Creative Commons as a GLAM manager, so galleries, libraries, archive and museums manager. I think you already went into the detail of why we're also celebrating the public domain and the importance of celebrating it and its important and essential place within the copyright ecosystem. But I will just provide a little bit more context very briefly. So Creative Commons has launched an Open GLAM program last year, and as part of this program, we are working as well on the public domain tools, and today I am very happy to actually discuss a little bit more in details what you've already mentioned. So the public domain dedication CC0 and the public domain mark PDM. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the public domain dedication CC0. Well, I think we are among professionals of GLAM's institution here. So some of you are already working with CC0 or the public domain mark. But I will go a little bit into details, and feel free to ask questions. I'm also happy to respond. So we've also noticed a little bit of sometimes hesitation around the public domain dedication tool or the public domain mark. What is what, and what fits the best your institution policy. And that's why I'm also really happy to discuss a bit about this. So for the public domain dedication, CC0, CC0 means that no rights are reserved. So it's when creators waive all their rights and place their work directly in and immediately into the public domain. In opposition to what the public domain mark is. And if you could go next slides. Thank you. Well, actually, the public domain mark is used to communicate the public domain status of a work. So it's not a license, it's really a type of label or tag used on a work that is already free of copyright restriction worldwide. So it's more like a label that you can put on your collections to make sure that users are understanding that this item is in the public domain. Why the CC0 is a creator which is waiving his rights. So it's a at the end the result is the same, but it's two different ways of putting your collection in the public domain. So for the public domain mark, it does not have the same value than the CC0 or the other CC licenses because it's not accompanied by a legal code. So what we have within the CC licenses and the legal code that is attached to those licenses is not in the public domain mark. And I will repeat it again just to make sure that this is clear. It's a label. It's just to make sure that people can recognize when they are using collections that that this item, this artifact, this reproduction is actually in the public domain. So so I think that's it. I think it's really brief. I don't know if you have questions, I will take them in the chat. Of course, I'm happy to discuss that. And we are also delighted to actually invite you to if you're interested to fill in a survey, because CC has actually launched on the 1st of January 2022, we've launched a survey on public domain tools and GLAMs. So what we are trying to achieve is to have a good idea, a good understanding on how galleries, libraries, archives, and museums are actually working with CC0 and the public domain mark with their collection, and if there is anything that we could analyze that would on what we could improve on those tools. I will actually share in the chat as well after the links to the survey, but we invite you all, if you have 10 minutes, to fill in this survey, because it would be super helpful for us to have your understanding, and also to understand what are maybe the issues that are encountered by your institution when they are working public domain tools or the CC0 license. The deadline is actually very soon. It's 15th of February, but you still have a couple of days, and that would be really great. So thank you so much for your time and attention, and I remain available later on. Thank you.
Gezet,
You're
muted,
muted.
Sam.
Muted. Okay. All right. This is interesting. All right. I'll share my screen again. Voila. So it should be fine now. Everybody see the slide of the OpenGLAM showcase?
Yeah, it's okay, Sam.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we got to the part of the OpenGLAM showcase. So as I already said, this is just an annual platform for heritage institutions to share their progress in making public domain collections accessible, reusable, and reused. Concrete actions, policy changes within their institution, and also sharing best practices. So I'll start with some work that I'll be doing, or rather that an intern has been doing at our place. We had the opportunity to have an intern help us with a image upload. So the Fine Art Museum of Ghent, they already uploaded the metadata of their collections to Wikidata in 2016, and then uploaded subsequent images accompanied with public domain day in previous years. There's about 450 images online, but now we got an additional more than 1,000 images, which are ready, prepared, and waiting to be uploaded. However, the upload tool for Wikimedia Commons was down until 2 days ago, and I have not been able to install it on my computer since. But in the coming weeks, those will go to Wikimedia Commons. MSK also wanted me to announce that they're also working on their new website, which will launch in September, and should give access to some 5,000 items through that website as well. Okay, so that kind of segues nicely into a short update about Wikimedia tooling for those who are interested in uploading their collections on Wikimedia platforms. So as I said, there's a new release of that upload tool, so you should be able to resume your activities as planned now. But there's other stuff that's changing in the Wikimedia tooling. So first of all, Wikimedia Comments now already had structured data, machine readable data to increase the searchability of the image bank Wikimedia Commons. But now there's also a Sparkle querying service, which will allow people to also just query the images and the data connected to them. Another thing that is also interesting for us, because we also train the heritage sector to use tools to upload their collections online, is OpenRefine. So OpenRefine is a data wrangling, data cleaning tool, which already allows you to upload data to Wikidata, but now there will be an option to batch upload structured metadata to Wikimedia Comments. And what is also new, it should be able to allow for batch image uploads straight from OpenRefine instead of PattyPan. So that's definitely something that we will be talking about in fall when we will do our upload workshop. So now I would like to go to the next speaker, which will be Piet Janssens and Sébastien Hermans from the Royal Library of Belgium, that will tell us something about the upload they have done this year.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Sam, for the info about the new tools. It seems like very attractive to use them in the future. And the following two slides, my colleague Sebastian and I, working for the Digit department of KBR, will be happy to explain which works we have published this year in the public domain. A part of the digital collection that we present on this occasion brings together the editions of Cousine Travel Guide, published by Maurice Cousine. The 50 volumes digitized and accessible now in our catalog contains 6,000 pages and covers various regions of Belgium, and giving a view of different cultural areas in the first half of the last century. While digitizing the foldouts with maps of the walking routes, the mention of a cuisine project in the legend got our interest. It became clear how the private individual, Maurice Cousine, the public domainer, was able to transform his activity into a center of long-distance footpaths. He made, therefore considered the founder of the transnational hiking paths, but was never really recognized as such in Belgium. And because book pages published on Wikimedia platforms is not the greatest place to start opening the tourist guides collection, we found the Art Nouveau covers sufficient for publication on Wiki Comments. And the first step in wikifying the story of the cuisine guides in general was the publication of those Art Nouveau covers. Besides, we created items for the different long hiking trails, part of that cuisine plan. And the next stage is to publish the maps who are in the guides on Wikimedia Commons, also being 100 digital maps reproductions showing sections, in fact, of the long distance footpaths. An intern from the KU Leuven has also started this month to investigate how we can reuse maps in general at KBR with online services and DH tools. Next to our existence Cartesius portal. This will be part of a 4-month internship at the Digit department. Yeah, next slide, please. Thanks, Sam.
Okay, then apart from the cuisine guides, we for this year also did a little research in what the collections hold in prints and drawings from artists, and we found 3 painters of whom we have like some works in the print cabinet of the Royal Library, and which were reasonably under catalogued, and so this needed to be done. It concerns work of Richard Baseler, Constant Eugène de Buschere, and Albert van Dijk. they're not the most renowned artists, but they played a role in Belgian art history, and the works we have may sustain further research on their elsewhere. But first of all, we needed to catalog decently, which was done in the print cabinet with a selection which was made by the curator. And then we digitize it in 2021. And as from the 1st of January, we were able to put online the images. We created Wikidata items, as we have been doing the last 2 years as well, for uploads for these records in detail. And then finally, we donated, so to speak, the images as a public domain dedication in Commons. And we tried to categorize it a bit to make it more findable and reusable. Unfortunately, there is no event this year where we can go further on editing these things, but they may be of use for all kinds of users. That's about all. The links to the Commons categories for the 3 have been created, and I suppose there will be work uploaded soon, as Sam said, also of these artists, I suppose.
All right, thank you, Sébastien. I guess then we will move on to the next speaker, which is my colleague Ellen van Key, who will say something about our process reviewing rights labels on our Art in Flanders platform.
Okay, thank you, Sam. So Art in Flanders, most of you know it. It's an initiative by MIMO, a database of 30,000 plus images of paintings, sculptures, and other artworks from the collections of Flemish museums, cultural institutions. You can move to the next slide, Sam. And so last year, we started a review of the rights labels we are currently using on Art in Flanders. So the main reasons for this were actually, firstly, that we noticed inconsistencies in the rights information we were providing. To give an example here, well, you see that it says on the right, license is CC0, but on the bottom, there's a photo credit and the copyright label and the name of the photographer. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, some of the rights labels we were using actually felt increasingly inadequate in view of the latest developments and current state of law and knowledge in cultural IP. So in this case, in fact, this painting is old enough to be in the public domain, but the public domain where the PDM mark would apply, where no copyright is applicable. So actually what we are doing here is creating rights over the surrogates by using a CC license, and we realized that in fact we didn't want to do this. So the goal was to review and propose a kind of new and state-of-the-art set of labels for our images we have on Art in Flanders. You can move to the next. So the guiding principles we had 2 main guiding principles. The first one was to be as open as possible. As I said, we mainly wanted to avoid surrogate IP works over artworks in the public domain. And this ties in with the Digital Single Market Directive, Article 14, that says material resulting from an act of reproduction is not subject to copyright. Now, this idea of what is in the public domain stays in the public domain already was embodied in earlier on in the Europeana Domain Charter, and it has really become the mainstream, well, the state of the art in the sector. But on the other hand, we also wanted to be as closed as necessary. So we did want to honor relevant IP rights or other applicable legal agreements where they existed. And for us, this was mainly, on the one hand, copyrights of the photographer when he made original photos of artworks. And this is also ties in with the Article 14 of the DSM directive, where it says already itself that unless it is an original intellectual creation, then there is a copyright for the photo of a public domain work. And then on the other hand, we also have property rights of the owner who can impose, actually, he can impose restrictions on access and reproduction of artworks in his collection. So next, based on these two principles, we have worked out a proposal for a set of new rights labels for the public domain marks on Art in Flanders. And before I present them in more detail, I must insist that it's currently still very much more of a research project. It is certainly not yet a validated organizational policy. So don't panic if you don't disagree. Things might change. But let's start with a simple case. The simplest case would be the public domain, the photos of two-dimensional artworks in the public domain. We currently label them as CC0, which implies that the copyright has been waived. However, the artwork is a 16th century painting, so no, it is in the public domain and no copyright applies. And the photo is a technical reproduction. And their Belgian case law has established that also no copyright applies due to a lack of originality. So here our proposed label would be the public domain mark instead of the CC0 for the reasons that Camille also explained just earlier on in the session. As a first complexity, however, arises when the owner imposes restrictions on access and permission to make the photos. So these could be all kinds of restrictions, and one that we often get is that he doesn't want modifications to be made to the photos. So currently what we do with these images, we label them CC BY, non-commercial, no derivatives. And actually what we do here, we make a translation of a set of restrictions imposed by the owner on his property rights into a copyright license, which is obviously not very adequate. Because actually what you see here, the artwork is a 18th century painting, and so no copyright applies. And the photo is a technical reproduction, so also no copyright applies. So a copyright license is inappropriate, actually. So the proposed new label here would be the rights statement, no copyright, contractual restrictions. A rights statement also, as Camille says, is like is a label, it's not a license. So a second and more difficult complexity arises when we have three-dimensional artworks in the public domain. Like here, you have an artwork. It's a 19th century sculpture, clearly in the public domain. However, the photo is not in the public domain. Actually, it is in copyright. Belgian case law has established that this because photographers in this case can make personal free choices in lighting, point of view, etc. So here, our current best option is to use the CC BY label because the license actually, because attribution is typically required in the photographic contracts with IEF. But our preferred label obviously would be the CC0 because then the copyright would be waived and the work could remain in the public domain. But we still would support attribution as a best practice through reuse. So next one. So that's the theoretical part. But moving from theory to practice, we still have a lot of issues involved. And the first one, the major one, are the legal formalities. So for one, this is only a proposal at the time. We still need positive legal advice on these proposed new labels. Also, we would need a revision of IP clauses in the photographic contracts. The concerned photographers, in the case of the 3D works, they would need to consent with this. There's also an issue of we can change contracts for internal photography work, but we can't do that for external. So how will we go about with that? Then there's technical choices, back office, like how do we separate the 2D images from the 3D? Regarding the front office implementation, we need to work on how do we want this preferred citation to happen. And then there's the aspect of the user involvement, both regarding the content providers. We will have to create a support base for them also, hopefully, to adopt the new labeling policies. And we want to promote, of course, the reuse of the data and the collection with the end users. So in conclusion, I must say that we are still very far away from actually implementing a new policy. Even this rights label proposal remains primarily theoretical and an internal proposition for the moment, and we still need to run it by a variety of parties in order to get an agreement on this. There's the legal consent of photographers, management, etc. But also your feedback is absolutely welcome at this stage. So I think the next stage will certainly become very interesting too. Thank you.
Sam, uw micro is weer gemute.
All right, I was just going to thank Alan for a presentation and to show like how this is this can be a whole process. Of course, what makes it complex at Art in Flanders is that it's a collection of all these different institutions, of course. But then I guess we will move on to Bart. So you managed to share your slides, okay?
Yes, do you see it full screen now?
Yeah, everything is perfect, so take it away.
Okay, great. Okay, so I want to tell you a bit more about the public domain tool, which is a tool that we launched about a year ago. It started actually from the observation that we know that there is a lot of public domain content in a lot of collections, but that it seemed to be that seemed not to be so easy to identify that public domain content, either because of legal expertise, either because of just time to do it, because it's a very time-consuming job. And so we thought about ways to automate that process to the extent that it's possible. And so that's what the public domain tool does. It helps you to automate the identification of public domain content in your collection. You see a couple of links here on this slide, the page of the tool on the website of Memo. We also had an article published on Europeana Pro, which is in English. So for the non-Dutch speakers, it's a good general introduction to the tool. And there is a link to the tool itself. We don't have the time for a complete demo here, but I want to briefly explain to you how it works. So we want to automate this identification of public domain content based on two things. On the one hand, your own metadata in the form of a CSV export containing typical information like the type of work, names of creators, birth and death dates of creators, the date of creation. And on the other hand, we make use of data that is already available in Wikidata. To do that, or to combine those two, you start to upload this CSV export with collection data in the tool, and you get some proposed matches then to creators that are already available in Wikidata. And there is the manual work that remains to be done. It's that these proposed matches need to be validated. So you have to tell whether the suggestion that a certain person is the same as the one on Wikidata is correct, yes or no. Based on that validation, you upload your CSV again to the system, and as an output you get an enriched CSV. So your CSV is completed. There is additional information, for example, birth and death dates that are pulled from Wikidata. There is, based on the combined information from your own data and Wikidata, we try to identify public domain works. If available on Wikidata, external identifiers are being added. And on the second output of the tool is that your collection data that are part of that CSV are also added to Wikidata, and that in turn is a great help for other organizations using the public domain tool, because very often a certain artist, creator doesn't have work in your collection only, but the work is dispersed over different collections. And maybe you have interesting information such as a birth date or death date in your system that was not available on Wikidata so far, but by using the tool, you add that information again to Wikidata so others can make use of it. Yeah, I have to say the tool is in Dutch, so basic knowledge of Dutch is recommended, but we can also we can always help you with some stuff too if that's needed. What you see here is a very brief example of the enriched CSV that I was just talking about. So very often the original CSV has not all the information that is available here. For example, in this case, birth dates and death dates have been added. Every creator has a Wikidata Q ID, even the ones who didn't have one before. For these ones, the tool creates a bot creates a new Wikidata Q number on or a new Wikidata item based on the available data from your expert. If possible, external identifiers are being added to the CSV, and for every item you get a copyright status, which is either public domain, either in copyright, or copyright unknown, if there's simply not enough information to say something. For example, the Frans van Montfort case here, where there is no birth date, no death date, and even no, yeah, well, that makes it very difficult based on the creation date of the item 1919. It's very, yeah, we cannot really say whether this person has died in before 1952 or not. So that's just an example of what you get back. On the Wikidata side, you can see that there are references being added to existing statements, and that new statements are being made based on the collection data. For example, we know that a person is a human. That was already known by Wikidata, but we make the reference here to, for example, Bakkerij Museum Veurne, who is one of the users of the public domain tool so far. But also to the collections are identified as under the statement has works in collection. So, for example, this person Anton Rijke has works in several collections, and one of those is Bakkerij Museum Veurne, and that statement was added together with the reference based on the use of the public domain tool. The other bakery museum is a bakery museum in the Netherlands, with other references again. As a complement to the tool, there is the dashboard-like functionality, where here, for example, for the Royal Museum of Fine Arts in Antwerp, you can see that for all the creators in their collection that are known in Wikidata, you can see how many of them belong to the public domain, how many of them are in copyright, and how many of them have an unknown status. So that's insightful information. But even more interestingly, I think it's great to have a look at the unknown section, because that can be seen as a sort of working list for a collection or for a heritage organization to see whether there is more information available that can help us to tell whether a person's work belongs to the public domain or not. You can see in a lot of cases on this slide that there is almost no information available in terms of birth dates, death dates, or work that has been made in a certain period. But for some there is, and you could say, for example, for the last three, okay, their birth date is quite a long time ago. So there's a great chance that these persons have died before 1952, but we cannot be sure, or we have no evidence that is the case. So this kind of table gives you sort of working lists, in which case it might be interesting to do some further research to be able to identify more public domain content. So again, here you have the links in case you wanted to scan QR codes. You have a second chance now, and if not, we will the presentation will be sent to you. Of course, there is my email address in case you want to contact me about this. And that brings me to second thing that I want to tell you, it's a range of projects supported by the Flemish community that that help heritage institutions to catch up with their digital collection data. And these projects, they get coaching from Memo, and also a lot of these projects will make use of the public domain tool, because one important thing here is, of course, to be able to identify the public domain content in these collections. Very briefly, some background. This is the fourth call of this sort that has been launched. 16 projects have been approved that have just started and will end in December next year. You see the total budget allocated to these projects, and the role of Memo there is to give tailored advice and coaching in each of these projects. I won't read this slide in its entirety. It's also the descriptions or short summaries of what the projects entail are in Dutch here, of course. But just yeah, this is meant just as a brief summary for you about which projects are in this call, or are approved rather. And to highlight that the variety of these projects in terms of content, but also in terms of right status. For example, some collections are clearly entirely public domain. For example, the incunables of the Flemish Heritage Library. There's no question about copyright status there. And others will use a public domain tool to help them identify public domain content. For example, ADVN, Koers, Stam, and KDOC, KUL. So the important point here about these projects is that there is a very important commitment of all these cultural heritage institutions to make the public domain content that is in scope in these projects digitally available without restrictions. So that's very good news, or something to highlight today on our Public Domain Day celebration, of course. So we are very happy that they all made this commitment. Where will they publish their public domain content? On Wikimedia platforms, that's one example. They will be making use, or a lot of them will be making use of Wikidata, Wikimedia Comments, Wikipedia, and they will also use their own platforms or platforms at municipal level. So these organizations have their own websites, their own databases, but there's also the data hub of the city of Antwerp, or in Ghent, the open data portal of the city of Ghent. There's also collections of Ghent, the collections of Ghent platforms, which we will come back to in the panel conversation in a moment. So the idea there is also, if the public domain status is identified, if the content is available, then we can take the next step of publishing it or making it available as broadly as possible. These are my colleagues responsible for the coaching of these projects, and they will be assisted by the rest of the expertise team at Memo for specific parts of the projects. So if there's any questions, please put them in the chat, and I will try to answer them there. And I think we can then move on to the panel conversation. You can maybe, or you can choose to take over my screen, or I don't know how we do that.
Yeah, I'll take over your screen. Thank you very much, Bart, for sharing your ongoing projects. Okay, I should be on the slideshow. So the idea of this this panel conversation is to sort of like move a bit beyond the principal question. So not claiming new restrictions on public domain works is slowly becoming the norm. I guess we can sort of discuss about that, but that's certainly something we've been seeing. It's becoming the norm at institutions in Flanders. It's also becoming the norm at the government. The government is also asking for that more and more. So this time we decided to focus on the how and why, not as a principal question, but more in terms of practical strategy. So how do you actively facilitate creative reuse. And for this, we have invited Sophie Teugels from Collections of Ghent, Dieter Suls from the Fashion Museum of Antwerp, Dietrich Vlaming from Koers, and Olivier van Duinslager from the Design Museum of Ghent. So what we asked them is to prepare a small lightning presentation to show you what they have been working on in terms of facilitating reuse. And we'll go through their presentations first, and then we'll start the conversation. So I propose that I will move the slides, and you just tell me when to move. So Sophie, can you share your camera?
Yes, my camera is on, I think. Hi, everybody. Sam, I only have one slide, so it's easy.
Yes.
Thank you for the introduction, Sam. Hello, my name is Sophie. I work for Collections of Ghent, Collectie van de Gentenaar in Dutch. And I'm here today to tell you something about how we stimulate the reuse of digitized cultural heritage data. So Collections of Ghent works with 6 collections. We have the 5 collections of our content partners, who are Archief Ghent, Design Museum Ghent, Huis van Alleen, Industriemuseum and Stam. And we have the 6th collection that is composed of the input of citizens. And apart from breaking open the data silos by linking and structuring the data, and creating digital platforms that reach out to new audiences, Collections of Ghent also stimulates the reuse of the collection data. And for this, we created a couple of instruments, namely the web platform, Cultural Data Lab, and the Co-Creation Fund. So the first instrument is the web platform. I put the link on my slide, data.collectie.ghent. And the web platform collects the data of the 6 collections, and the data, when published on the platform, is linked, structured and open, rights clearance included. And in the data preparation, the cultural heritage institutions are supported by the data team. So every institution has one full-time employee for the duration of the project to attend to the data. And regarding rights clearance, the data team and the institutions are working on a workflow, and I'm happy to say that we agreed on some basic points when starting rights clearance. For example, to determine copyright, the object is a starting point, not a digital reproduction. So it's an open call if you are also working on a workflow or risk analysis concerning rights clearance. I'm very open to share our findings and experience so far. And I'm also very interested in how other institutions manage rights clearance. So please contact me if you want to talk shop. I put my mail address also on the slide. So the web platform facilitates the findability, the searchability and usability of the data. So everybody interested in reusing the data can go to one platform that aggregates all 6 collections. So that's the first instrument. The second instrument is the Cultural Data Lab. And that during the first half of the project, the Cultural Data Lab focused on knowledge sharing. For example, together with Memo, we organized a copyright lecture. And in the second half of the project, which is actually starting now, the Cultural Data Lab will focus more on sharing inspiring examples of data reuse by organizing workshops, for example, hackathons and webinars. So that is the second instrument. And then the third instrument is the Co-Creation Fund. And the Co-Creation Fund reserves 200,000 euros for interested parties that want to reuse the data. So anybody really with a good idea of creative or technological reuse can apply. And the fund provides a minimum of 2,000 euros and a maximum of 20,000 euros per project. So this is a financial stimulus to reuse the data. And applications are still open until mid-March. So if you are curious or interested, please check our website or contact me. And I also want to add, so apart from these 3 instruments, I see in the chat, we also have a linked data event stream, of course, that is, thank you for sharing, that is particularly an interest for people who want to do the technological reuse. So the linked data event stream is, you can actually see it as a base API that you can use to create technological reuse of our data. And to conclude, so we have 3 instruments, but I also want to add that within the project of Ghent, we also we do put a lot of human effort as well into the stimulation of data reuse. We have a team of field workers who are present in the neighborhoods, who are contacting people and directing them to the Co-Creation Fund, the Cultural Data Lab, our web platform, who are organizing all sorts of activities to engage people in reusing cultural heritage, but also to make them aware of their own cultural heritage. So for collections of Ghent, it's the combination. So the stimulation of reuse is the combination of the instruments and the efforts of a dedicated team that actively reaches out to the audience. So this is, in short, how collections of Ghent stimulates the reuse of the data. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Sophie. I guess then we will move on to Koers by the presentation of Dieter Vlaming. Diethard, sorry, can you share your screen?
If it's all right, I've only 3 slides, so if you could go through them, that would be great.
Okay, will do.
Thank you very much. So my name is Diethard Vlaming and I work for Koers Museum of Cycle Racing in Roeselare, or in Dutch, Koers Museum van Wielersport. And last year we launched a new website, Service Koers, which main goal is to display cycling collections, not just ours, but also those of collectors, other institutions, if there is any interest, and to share them broadly with the public. We also want to showcase our research and facilitate people to do their own. The main thing we want to achieve is to have people reuse our own collection. For example, last week we got a question from a manufacturer or a butcher who wanted to use some images of our own in their branding, and we are more than happy to oblige. But we've noticed that we still have a long way to go, which is actually our main challenge, is to get a platform out there and to get more people excited to use it and to start reusing our content. Right now we are looking at linking with other platforms. This one is on the next slide. We are right now looking at ways to link with other platforms, for example, Wikimedia, but also to invest more in social media, as most of our users or our interested public is there. And of course, to invest more in multilingual content. But we are all ears for more ideas on how we can improve this, as this is a very young project. There's still a lot of growth potential.
Okay, thank you very much, Diethard, for your talk. Also, Koers has already uploaded actually some sets of images on Wikimedia Commons, and actually, if you check on the GLAM Wiki dashboard, you can check the views on that collection. Actually, it's rather a lot. That shows that there's very much a very global audience for a regional museum. Okay, so then we'll move on to the Fashion Museum with Dieter Sulz. Dieter, can you share your screen?
Okay. Hello, thanks for having me, Sam. I would like to say something about a bit of an experiment we did a couple of months ago called a Paternathon. So the idea was to invite a community of creators, of makers, of designers, and have them create patterns of a historical collection of the museum called the Study Collection, which is available in the reading room. Can you, next slide, please? So first step we did is we uploaded a selection of this collection, 30, 40 objects. We uploaded the images of them into Wikimedia Comments. We invited then people over and also made the selection of objects available in the reading room. And what we did is we asked them to make a pattern and also contribute or donate the pattern to Wikimedia Commons, so it would be there for reuse. Because we know that there's a big community for people recreating costume or reinterpreting costume. Next slide, please. So the idea behind the Paternathon was to build further on formats such as an editathon, which is a kind of an editing session for Wikipedia. But we thought perhaps we can achieve the same thing, but then with patterns of costume. The source for this event was the study collection, which is a collection of about 2,000 objects we make available in our museum, but as a resource for direct consultation. So it's in our reading room, you can not only access books, but you can also access museum objects. The event targeted the creative reuse of this collection. So we don't want to only make it available for researchers, but also creative reuse has to be one of the targets for this collection. And we collaborated for this together with the University of Antwerp, Department of Conservation and Restoration Studies, that supported us methodologically in the sense that they did a small workshop on how you make a pattern of a historical costume and how do you share these things. We were also supported by the Citizen Heritage Project, which is a project valorizing citizen science. And they supported us with communication, but also they gave us some tools to work with us. They bought us some rulers and patterns, paper and stuff like that. So we had a small cost. They took care of it. And the Citizen Heritage Project is managed by KU Leuven, Europeana Fashion Heritage Association, and then the Erasmus University. So I think the result of this one time event was interesting. So what we want to do now is to learn to do it again, repeat and learn from it, because since it was a new thing, we don't have guidelines yet to how you make it happen. And one of the main thing is that we want to make sure that the outputs of this Paternathon has to be the correct input for the creative reuse of the collection. So so once you have people making patterns, how do you share the patterns? Which metadata is necessary? Which platforms do you use? So just let's say make a picture of a part of a pattern is not enough. You have to do different things. So we have to learn and see with the community what's the best results or what's the best way to share what they have created. Another thing that we want to do is to create guidelines so that this Paternathon could also be set up at another place for other people with another collection. And the result of everything has to be, we want to build a community of makers and create a corpus of openly licensed patterns through sharing via Wikimedia Commons. Voila.
Okay, thank you very much, Dieter. I think this is a super good example of an institution realizing that what they are used to doing, usually sharing an image or reproduction of a work, is perhaps not what a certain reuse community actually needs. So I think it's very interesting, and I'm looking forward to see what your ongoing experimentation will yield. And then this brings us to the last presentation of Olivier van Duinslager. Will say something about his work at the Design Museum Ghent.
Yes, thank you for the introduction, Sam. Maybe a bit different from the previous three lightning talks. We are at the brink of closure. So in March, the Design Museum in Ghent will close its doors till summer of 2024. This also gives us a lot of opportunity to think about our collection website and the collection online. And maybe I just want to share more a vision than a realization of a project. We believe that it's important for designers today who want to design the present and of course also the future, that they also must know their past. And this picture shows how back in 1903, when the museum was established by the Association of Industrial and Decorative Arts, it was more conceived as a models museum. So it collected good examples of crafts and trade, and saw its main public role to inspire artists and craftsmen. It was, if you look at the patterns on the walls, it's almost a kind of linked open data avant la lettre. And that's why almost 120 years later now, we are researching how this model or how this museum model can inform us and inform us on our new collection presentation that will be opened in 2024 with a new wing, not only on site, but also online and all hybrid encounters in between. Maybe the next slides. So as a museum, we also realized that there's only so much we can say, there's only so much we can show, and we need to figure out how we can leverage other interfaces and other types of interfaces. And I think also Dieter talked about this. You can share patterns, but it's also thinking about what interfaces are necessary to really engage with this kind of context. And in the same way, we also need to think about how can we create interfaces that allow for other voices to appear and to be heard and included. This has a lot to do with participation and inclusion. And to do so as a design museum, we really want to engage with our peers. So ranging from young designers, young design graduates to the dynamic designers working in the field of system interface and or information design, and even allow for more speculative forms of design to enter the online realm or the hybrid realm of the museum. So we don't only want to rework the data, but also rethink the system and the interfaces through which these are accessed online. And in that way, we want the online collection to become a playground, a breeding ground, a sensing layer for what is and what isn't happening around us. And maybe to conclude, the Design Museum doesn't really envision Creative Commons only as a means to promote creative reuse, but also as a way to question how digital culture, in our case design, is both produced, distributed, and circulates in a post-internet age. Thank you, Sam.
All right, thank you, Olivier, for sharing your vision on what a design museum is supposed to do with its digital collection. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. All right, could all the panelists please turn on their microphone and camera? Perfect. All right, Sophie?
My camera is on.
Oh,
You
okay,
don't see me?
that's just my screen then. All right, perfect. So thank you all for sharing something about your practice or your vision on what a heritage institution can do to actively facilitate reuse. So I'm going to launch into my first question. So it's still COVID-19 period. So I think something that we've all been thinking about is that the restrictions in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic has been, in a way, the perfect test case to see whether the heritage sector was digitally mature to serve its audience online. So do you believe that the Belgian heritage institutions in general were ready for this pandemic? Was your institution ready for this pandemic? Are there previous efforts that you've made that you've seen are really paying off now? And if not, did you change priorities during the pandemic to better reach your audiences? These are a lot of questions, but I thought maybe first to start with Olivier.
Were we ready for the pandemic? I don't think anyone was ready for this or was expecting this. I think what was important for us is that we realized that we didn't really have a platform or an online platform to engage with our audience. We did have the social media channels, and those appeared to be very important, as also Dieter mentioned. But to really use our collection online also meant that we had to clear or copyrights, applied rights statements, because they wanted to make HIFs out of them. They want to really creative reuse them, and that was, I think, a bit daunting to do this. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Dieter, the Fashion Museum had already actually prior been closed for several years. So in a way, you were already dealing with this. So do you think that the Fashion Museum somehow was prepared for this situation?
No, very short. No, we took the past years mainly to work on the back end and on the back office to try to reorganize our collection in the best possible way by working with the digital asset management system, also working behind the screens in our archives. We also worked on an external depot. So our focus the past year has been very internally, but we hope in the next year we will turn more outwards and make the collection more available. Also because of the work that we prepared during our closing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, that's definitely something that I've seen reflected in the early webinars or conversations that were happening between institutions, that people were talking about all their front office activities, like, oh yeah, we've switched to social media, but obviously there's also back office work that you need to do in order to give people access to your collections. But maybe we can move with this question to Dieter, because actually your museum is a regional museum located a bit decentral, and you are already, before the COVID period, you're already realizing that actually you have a collection that has a potential global reach digitally, because a lot of people are very interested in your collections, but you're a regional museum. So is that something that sort of made you a bit more able to deal with the COVID situation?
We started our shift towards digital back in 2017, 2018, when we applied for new funds for the museum, but we only got to work on them or start experimenting at the end of 2019, a couple of months before Corona hit everybody. So we weren't as prepared as we hoped we were. We had a lot of content, we had a lot of information we tried to put out there, mainly through social media, but our back office, everything to do with registration data, we were still looking at it and still trying to figure out how we could implement a good process, how we could make everything run more smoothly. And on some parts, we are still looking at how we can do better towards the future. But I think the main thing from Corona was, at least the first couple of months, that we were already working on a digital strategy, on finding our own voice and looking at how we can open up our collections, what were necessary steps to take. And those first few months where we could experiment, or were forced to experiment heavily on social outreach through social media or other platforms, were a gift in a sort of way, because we could take it back to the digital strategy that we were writing at the time.
Okay, that's interesting how you managed to shift priorities. Actually, that brings me to Sophie, because your project, Collectie van de Gentenaar, Collections of Ghent, is very much premised on increasing the main object is not just opening up digital collections, but that in doing so you increase social cohesion. So I can imagine that COVID must have been a issue for the project. Can you tell us something about that, and how you adapted
Yeah. Like I was saying before, we have a few instruments to stimulate reuse, but there's also a big human effort, a big human part in this. And of course, yes, we were affected by COVID. The field workers, they were not able to do all the activities that they wanted to do. And also, even though you have a web platform, and even though the people will be stimulated to add their own collections, if you cannot reach them in person, if you cannot reach them, if you cannot make this human effort, it's still very hard to engage people in the project. So yes, we were affected by COVID-19 for sure.
I'm sure we all were.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move to the next question. So how do you decide which, this is maybe one where we start with Dieter. So how do you decide which audiences you want to focus on serving, and how did you find them? Like, maybe you can start specifically for the Patternathon. Where did the idea come from? Was it from the institution, or did a researcher come to you, or some reuser?
Actually, what I also mentioned earlier, that we worked on the back office. We also realized that a big part of our collection will never be available for an audience. But on the same time, because of the study collection, first let's catch a bit. We have reorganized our collection in the way that we have now an external depot, which means that most of our collection is not easily available anymore, even to our own staff, because it's stored externally somewhere in the port of Antwerp. But on the same time, we thought we have to provide a resource that's more accessible for an audience. So the idea of the study collection emerged. It emerged already 5-10 years ago. But the moment it was ready, we had to close the museum because of renovation works. And now, unfortunately, we have closed again for renovation works. Some minor tweaking to do, but anyhow, that's another story. But once we reopened, we thought, okay, we have here now this study collection. How do we work with this? Who will we attract? How will people engage with it? And on the one hand, you have very students, they always come up. We work in the same building as the Fashion Academy, so also other fashion academies from Belgium, Netherlands, they all find their way. But we also thought we also want to work together with the creative community that's also around in Antwerp or in Belgium. And let's say, as a way to trigger them, we thought a Patternathon would be an interesting concept. It was also for us an experiment, so we also didn't know when we invited, or when we sent out an email asking for people to come and to contribute, whether we would find them or not. But it was immediately we found a lot of response from people working in the fashion industry, people that work in conservation industry, people that teach, people that also, from a hobby perspective, do those kind of things. So the main goal for us was to stimulate another kind of usage of that study collection, and to have, as a result of that engagement, something for the creative community. So it was kind of a bit of a I don't know, some kind of an idea that emerged, and we thought, let's see if we can make it work, if we can find people. And we were very fortunate that we did. And actually, we had to close down the subscriptions, and we have 3-4 times oversubscribed for the event. So we're very happy that we will, let's say, next time we will find new people, a new community to create stuff. And then also Wikimedia has been a very interesting platform, because we already uploaded some images and some drawings and stuff like that on Wikimedia. And when you see the statistics of the usage, it's really absurd. You get millions of users by just uploading images on Wikimedia. So we also thought, okay, this could be an interesting platform. So we combined a bit all those different elements and came up with the idea of a Paternathon. And yeah, let's say from a first experiment, we could say it worked.
Okay. That's very interesting. I thought it was also interesting that you say that proximity is even when you're doing digital stuff and you may also be serving a global audience, that the fact that the students are close and that you can really work together and think together is a good thing. Dietrich, can you say something about that? Because you also uploaded some stuff on Wikimedia platforms, and it's seeing, I think, it also gathers a lot of international interest.
Yes, we've uploaded, I think, right now around 600 or 700 pictures. Some of them object pictures, others are pictures taken during races. We've linked them to the Wikipedia pages itself so that they are more visible and that they attract a broader audience. And right now we've noticed that, for example, when the Tour de France is written during the summer months, those pictures garner more attraction. I think those are also, or when it comes down to visibility, our most important ones. We get around 700,000 views a month, which is quite nice. During the winter, it's much less. It's around 50 or 70. So it's really important that the things we publish are linked to the news, things people see or hear about. And we've noticed that when it comes down to Wikipedia, it's more or less always researchers or people who are curious, who want to learn something more. And when it comes down to, for example, service course, it's more the people who are more interested, who want to know more specific details, who want to dive deeper into our content.
Okay, so do I get correct that you on the one hand, in order to capture that, like those views on Wikipedia, you have to have your collection out there, and then maybe some event will happen that gathers interest for something. But at the same time, you also get specific questions from people that need something.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
I think last month or a couple of months ago, we got specific questions from an English broadcasting network who wanted to use some of our pictures on Wikimedia Comments and wanted to know something more about the bikes in question.
Okay.
So it's a really nice way to open up your collection.
Okay. Olivier, maybe you can say something. I know you just said that you were very early in this reflection, maybe, but at the same time, your institution is also very close to design schools, so there's a lot of opportunity there. Can you say something about that?
Mm-hmm. And of course, I mean, that's also one of the reasons why we initiated the whole Collections of Ghent project, to really try and find out what's living in the city and get a grasp of what the role of the design museum might be in that. But what I was thinking about, even in the earlier question, is that how much we were not prepared, and it still reflects on us today, based on or in means of the content we have today. We are very much focused on registering all these facts and all these data very meticulously, but it's not always the most interesting content. It's not narrative, it's not telling a story. And that's of course the kind of content that people are expecting to see mainly on these or on these social media platforms. And that takes a lot of time. You need to write them, you need to translate it into different languages. And so I think in a sense, targeting the right groups, being designers or creative communities, even creative industry, is also in parts about, I think, content negotiation, what content is interesting for them, and how can this dialogue between us as the museum and them as maybe the reusers, how can that also be informative for us? And I think it's in that sense, it's also very much about creating new kinds of relationships to become relevant as a museum, to become relevant as an institution beyond the main museum practices of just displaying the collection. I think online and Creative Commons and public domain and Wikimedia are very nice tools to do so, but we still need to ensure that proximity, because Wikidata and Wikimedia Commons can also feel very far off from the actual institution. And how can we re-establish this dynamic? I think that's something very important to be aware of in the near future. Yeah, and I think it's much easier for say like for Detail who is working, or it's not easier, I don't want to be disrespectful, but if you work on a subject like Koes, which is very lively and a lot of people are very passionate about this culture, so they feel very close to the actual museum. If you work in the design museum, it can very quickly feel hautain or these very expensive products, but design is much broader than that. And how can we open up that dialogue as well? Because it's also part of our main culture today. Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe there's something to be said for sort of exporting the study collection idea of the fashion museum to other contexts, or something to integrate, to give more of a space and a sustainable connection with these kind of students or reusers.
If I can say something about that, from Collections of Ghent, it's also, I talked about the 6th collection, so that's also one of the aims of the project, to engage people more, to make them aware of their own cultural heritage, and to give them an opportunity to add their heritage to the collections. So in order to really strengthen the relationship between the citizens and the musea, and the cultural heritage institutions, so that they come closer and people feel that they are represented by the institutions. So that's also something we are working on in Collections of Ghent.
And maybe if I could just add one more thing, we're very much talking about the reusers outside of the institutions, but I think we're also reusers of each other's institutions, of the work we are doing. For example, we are now trying to incorporate the fashion thesaurus that has been built by the Fashion Museum, and it's very informative for us. And in a way, it connects both collections, and maybe it can become inspiring to do projects in the near future on patterns or on stuff like that. And then we broaden our audience in a more collaborative fashion, because I think many of the audiences that go to the Fashion Museum are maybe also interested in design and vice versa, but maybe they don't find the right entryway to both institutions. So I think there's a lot of potential in that as well.
It's nice to hear, Olivier.
Okay, maybe we can move to the next question. So yeah, so we are always involved, or always at a certain stage at a certain project, or executing this project or that. But what is like the right time to start the reflection on which audiences you want to choose? Like, do you begin before or after setting up like a new architecture for sharing digital collections, or is it an iterative thing? And if so, how do you future-proof your digital infrastructure for that? Maybe we could start with Sophie, because Collections of Ghent is a project. So maybe you can say something about that.
Yeah, well, in the beginning of the project, there were 3 neighborhoods selected in Ghent. So to give a little context, we also make a physical box, and we will land in those 3 neighborhoods with a box. So at first instance, the people who live in those neighborhoods are the target audience, because they can expect the box and they will be actively approached by the field workers. Secondly, in the creation of the infrastructure, it is iterative because we also work together with the University of Ghent, who do public research. They look for test audiences. They test the development of the infrastructure with the audience. They give feedback. So this is all taken into consideration in the development of the infrastructure. And then lastly, I think there are in the partner institutions, there are digital strategists. There are also data employees. So we try to engage them as well in order to ensure that they will be using the infrastructure after the project is done. So, but we start, if you talk about the target audience, we start with the 3 neighborhoods to actively approach them and try to engage them in reusing the data and in the activities and so forth.
Okay. And then the end point of this traveling box, actually the box is a digital experience environment where the digital collections can be seen, would be the design museum. So in fact, there is a durability consideration in there, which brings us to the design museum. Olivier, do you have something to say about this question?
Yeah, maybe very shortly. I believe that technology is a tool, and a tool needs to be used. And for it to be used, it needs to be useful. And I think it's much. I think you just need to start from a real life problem, and then start thinking what technology can be used to solve this problem, and not just build the technology and hope that the solution will come. I think that's a major pitfall. It's also something we noticed with the early implementations of linked data. Everybody published all their data out there, but then nothing happened with it because there was no use case for it, or there were no people who were actually doing something with it. So if you have an active community, maybe it's much easier to try and help the things they're already doing by building technological infrastructure for them or tools for them. I think it's more durable in the long run.
Okay, interesting. And that brings us maybe to my final question. So a lot has been made about this explosion of creativity that access to public domain artworks could cause, actually. But is it perhaps a bit naive to expect that this will just happen without actively facilitating reuse? Maybe a bit what you were getting at, Olivier. But yeah, if you want to actively facilitate reuse, then how much of a what is your experience of the cost-benefit ratio of the projects you've been working on? Is this something that is part of your job? Is it in your job description? Is there somebody at your institution that has like dedicated time for this? And do you think that there will be more roles at museum in the future for actively creating engagement with the collection digitally or otherwise? Maybe we can start with Dieter.
Okay. Well, I'm quite fortunate that in our museum, innovation is one element that's valued highly. So that allows me not to be micromanaged by my director. So that's a good thing. And I think it's, let's say, the experimentation. It's all a matter of scale. I think if you can do things easily on a small scale without much costs, without investing too much time in it, and it's successful, okay, great, do it. If the experiment is much more costly, then you have to think really hard before doing it. But I think it's a combination of elements. On the one thing, it's strategy. On the other hand, it's opportunities, things that you see happening. It's also being close to your users and understanding what triggers them, what drives them. I think also as a museum, on the one hand, you have, let's say, an authoritative function in which you, let's say, disseminate your content in your own curatorial way and make a nice product out of it, like, let's say, an exhibition. But on the other hand, you have an obligation to let's say, to unlock the full potential of your collection and make it available for as many types of usage as possible. For me, something like Wikimedia Comments has been a very good platform to make content available, because there you have a huge amount of people using it, seeing it. For example, the thesaurus that Olivier referred to. Also, let's say one of the starting points was a set of drawings that we asked to illustrate a thesaurus. We made it available on Wikimedia Commons. Then we had our own thesaurus, and then people start to match it with the AAT. So if you have your content on a popular platform, reuse automatically starts. I think it's not. Yeah, it's a bit my theory.
Okay, Sophie, you are in the, I guess, with the project in a rather fortunate position that the project itself allocates resources to initiate creative reuse. Can you say something more about that?
Yes. So you mean the co-creation fund?
Yes.
Yeah. We have the co-creation fund. It's 200,000 euros that we have available for interested parties who have an idea to reuse our data. It can be creative reuse, so artists, filmmakers, musicians, or it can be technological reuse, more digital makers. They can apply for the funding, and they can have a minimum of 2,000 euros per project, or a maximum of 20,000 euros per project. And in that way, we hope to really stimulate people to do something with our data, because all the data that is available on our web platform is linked and open, and the rights are cleared. They have a rights statement, or they are in public domain. So all the content on our web platform is available for reuse. And we hope that, so the application period is still running. So at this point, we have no idea what kind of ideas of reuse that will happen. But we do hope that some ideas are very good, and that also the institutions will see what is possible with linked open data, how you can reuse it. And we really hope that it can inspire our content partners, but also other institutions to open up their data and to use it for whatever creative technological use is possible.
Okay, thank you. Maybe finally, Olivier, since you started your lightning talk with more of a sort of a broad idea of what museums should work towards, and your museum should work towards, do you think it's feasible, it's realistic for a medium-sized museum like the Design Museum of Ghent to employ somebody who is, for instance, would be like a digital curator, or a digital facilitator, or?
I mean, why not? I think it's what Dieter already said. It's about a matter of scale, and I also believe that digital will become normative within the institution, and we will no longer think about curating online versus, there will still be a difference, but the reflex of everything will always have an online or a digital thing attached to it. And maybe we don't necessarily need someone curating on premise, but working together with designers and with students who do it for us. It can be equally as informative.
Okay.
Can I just add one thing to that? I think it's also important that you value the digital visitor as much as you value the physical visitor. And as long as this is not the case, probably a medium-sized museum will be very hard for them to have a digital curator there. But once you actually value the digital visitor, I think it makes a lot of sense to also curate your collection in a digital realm.
Okay. Maybe that brings me to a final question to wrap it all up. Do you find it easy to quantify digital engagement as much as physical engagement? Dieter, maybe since you brought it up.
Yeah. I think the other way to phrase what I just said is no. We don't do it, and that's one of the problems, I think.
Okay. Somebody else has an experience with quantifying digital engagement that they would like to share?
I think there are many tools by which you can do that for a website, Google Analytics, for Wikipedia or Wikimedia Comments, the GLAM dashboards or other the Glamorous tool, for example. But it's one thing to have the data and the numbers of how many people watch the collection online. And it's another thing to put them towards a board or towards the government and show them, and this is from our case, we are, as you put it, Sam, decentral museum. We have a lot of visitors who visit us physically, but we have a much bigger potential digitally, but it's very difficult to translate that potential, even with numbers, towards our government, municipal, or otherwise, to really get them to realize how much potential there is when it comes down to the digital stuff.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for weighing in. Then I think I will close this this panel conversation, and thank you very much for being part of it, all of you. And then it brings us to the last part. So let me just share my screen again. Oops. Almost there. So this brings us to the last part of today's webinar. As always, we will end this presentation with the Wiki Loves Heritage ceremony. So Geert, I propose that I will just move the slides for you if you have trouble sharing your slides. Is that okay with you?
It's okay for me, so yes.
Okay, perfect.
So I'm Geert van Pamela, I'm chair of Wikimedia Belgium. So I first present the Wiki Loves Heritage Prize ceremony, and then 5 minutes later I will present the Wikimedian in Residence project that we want to launch with museum and GLAM institutions. So first, what is Wiki Loves Heritage? Wiki Loves Heritage is a photo contest that started as an extension of the Wiki Loves Monuments and the Wiki Loves Arts in 2016. And it built also upon the Belgian Freedom of Panorama, which is a new law voted in 2016 that allows making photographs of everything what is basically visible from public, from the street, and with some extensions. So the overall goal is to make images available for Wikipedia, but also for other Wikimedia projects and also for the community, for the general public, and also other institutions that have licenses compatible with Creative Commons share alike. So it is an extension of Wiki Loves Monuments. All kinds of heritage is accepted, so not only buildings. We accept also intangible cultural heritage, folklore, landscapes, regional food, and so on. So it was organized for the first time in 2018. And this year, we also included all the images from the Wikiloves Pajottenland Senne Valley, which was also conducted during the summer, last summer. Most probably, as of this year, Wikiloves monuments worldwide will be replaced by Wikiloves Heritage, also as a worldwide contest. So the results for this year, for last year, last year, we received more than 2,000 pictures from 37 participants, of which there were 9 recurring participants who we know already from previous year's sessions. And in the second round, we had still 24 participants with 132 competing pictures, which led us to the third round, in which we had 14 participants still available with 26 pictures. And in the end, we selected, with the 9 jury members, we selected 10 winners, for which there were 4 recurring and 1 international. Yeah, you can see. So the first 7 pictures I will only mention briefly. So you have the Brussels Villa Ampin by Aldeco. You have the Brugge Houden Handrij by Sally V. You have the Ghent, the Graslei picture taken from the Korenlei from Michiel Verbeek. You have Hertel Axel Fietsen door de bomen by Paul Hermans. Number 6 is Ruisbroek. You have the Moulin de Ruisbroek from Thomas VKF. You have then the Canal du Centre, Stripi Bracquigny, Ascenseur numéro 3 by Benoît Brummer. And then you have the Graveyard from Brussels by Herman van den Broek. And then we arrive at the top 3, for which I will read a small evaluation prepared by the jury. You have here the Henri Chapelle, which is an American graveyard from the Second World War. This photo might have been the winner, actually. It is really a very nice picture with a lot of play of lines. It takes your eye through the whole photo, making the number of crosses even more impressive. The photo convinces with its depth perspective of the many arches of successive rows of graves, with the inclusion of the statue in the foreground, appealing to the idea of victory. You have victory and peace at one glance. The deaths of the soldiers were not in vain, and we honor those who have died. Then the Oude Ophaalbrug in Terolfene by Chris R.F. This photo is appealing because the theme which is portrayed, an industrial drawbridge. The photo is very successful because it harmonious color scheme. The alternation of green, orange, blue, and the touch of white, and the special distribution of the physical elements and the reflection in the water. This gives the heritage something very living instead of being old and rusty. The correct light intensity also contributes to this effect. The framing is right, the bridge is shown in its entirety, with a little more of the surrounding, but not so much that it doesn't that the object doesn't disappear from the picture. And then we have the winner, Le Château de Walzin by Nina Hartia, which is coming from Romania, sorry. It is a majestic image from the raw to the constructed, from the nature to the culture. In a combination of soft green, gray, and blue, the dominance of the castle is expressed by the frog perspective from which the photograph was taken. The castle thrones in all its glory, high on the rock, against the blue bright sky. Color and perspective contribute to the representation of the dominance, so that it does not need to be expressed in words. The photograph is speaking for its own. So yeah, so a small overview of a bit of statistics. A comparison compared with the previous years, we have more images this year. And we have we continue to have a share of more than 21% of all the images which are used on the Wikipedia platforms. So this is very nice. We will inform the winners. There are three of them who are online. For the other winners, we will inform them by email or by other ways. So then I can go to the next subject, which I will introduce. So Wikimedia Belgium presents and make known to all the GLAM institutions that we have a project called Wikimedian in Residence. Basically, next slide, please. So basically, what is it? A Wikipedian in Residence is a person who is paid to educate and to guide GLAM collaborators in using Wikimedia platforms and tools to document the GLAM catalog and the material belonging to a museum. So the ultimate goal is uploading images to Wikimedia Comments, to upload data and to integrate data into Wikidata, and to write about articles on Wikipedia. So the reasons why we do it is human resources are very scarce and limited amongst heritage institutions and also at Wikimedia Belgium. And otherwise, we would like to have projects that are larger than editathons, because a long-term project, a 6-month project, would have and will have more impact than just some consecutive editathons. And we want institutions and Wikimedia to more collaborate amongst them. We want museums to share their catalogs, and we want to make known museum catalogs to the general public. And we want to make the Wikimedia community larger and more sustainable. So about the respective responsibility of partners. So Wikimedium took the initiative to create a Friends of Wikimedia Belgium Fund, which is managed by the Koning Boudewijn Stichting. So we are inviting cultural institutions now to propose and to maybe execute the project in the second half of this year, and also provide some reporting for it. We invite also the Wikimedia community to collaborate on the subject. Next slide. So Wikimedia Belgium, we took the initiative. We set up funding campaigns. We have now 17,000 euro available, which we want to spend in the second half of this year. So we would like to attract 3 cultural institutions. Already today there are 6 or 7 candidates. So with this session already, we provide some information about the requirements of the proposals, and we will continue to give advice during the execution of the project. We will also be intermediate to other third parties, MEMO, other musea, Wikimedia Nederland, Wikimedia France, for example, and also to the Wikimedia community. Then the responsibilities of the Friends of Wikimedia Belgium Fund. It are 5 people and 2 members from the Koning Boudewijn Stichting that are managing the fund. They are responsible to evaluate and choose the project, to determine the available budget and how they can be made available. And they will, after evaluation, they will approve each project to go live in the second half of this year. The Koning Boudewijn Stichting, it is managing the overall administration. It will set up the contracts amongst the parties once the parties have been accepted. The Koning Boudewijn Stichting, it accepts gifts from the public and from enterprises and will provide tax certificates for the donators to be able to have some money recuperated via the tax declaration. It also performs financial reporting. It is validating the invoices and eventually paying the costs, the invoices. So then we arrive at the institutions who will need to be responsible for the concept of the project, to provide the personal administration, to pay the salaries, to pay the social security, income taxes, and so on, and to have an insurance of the Wikimedian in residence. Also, they need to provide workspace and equipment, laptop, scanner, and so on. They need to do the daily follow-up, the delivery of the objectives and the reporting, and to issue the invoices towards the Koning Boudewijn Stichting. So then the constraints, as I suggested, we could organize 3 projects this year for an estimated amount of 5,500 euro for each of the projects, which by coincidence, more or less, is the same amount which could be provided through the Flanders internship or the forum internship option. So the financing part could be done by multiple providers. So then we have the call for projects. So the call for project, it is open till 30th of April. It can be sent via email to projects@wikimedia.be. The second half of the year, the projects can be executed after they have been accepted, of course. The document that needs to be sent is no more than 6 pages, for which a PDF would be the preferred format. So in which you can describe your project, why you propose the project, what cultural, educational, and social results you would expect and propose. And then for the administration part, who is responsible, where it is organized, who will give the support, what resources are available, how you plan the project, the budget, and what are the proposed results of the whole project. So we welcome your suggestions, and we hope that we can select 3 GLAM institutions to work with us in the second half of the year. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Geert. I'm sure that this will be very useful for institutions that are completely on board with opening up their collections, but just do not perhaps have the time for it. So please get in touch with Geert for more information. So that kind of wraps it up for today. I would just like to say something about the other public domain activities that MEMO organizes. So the 17th, so next week, we do a public domain rights workshop for which you can register on the MEMO website. It is in Dutch. And in the fall of 2022, we will, like every year, organize our public domain upload workshop, also in Dutch, and where we will show the new Wikimedia tooling, hopefully. So thank you very much, and see you next year at another version.